enjoy the session. As you can see, we'll go through a bit of an introduction, why we want to actually draft-proof houses, how we find drafts, and some key principles before we get on to the actual how of draft-proofing. So first of all, if I can move my slide on. So who are we? My name is Ivana, and I'm joined by my colleagues Peter and Tom, who will take you through the latter parts of the presentation. And we have Johnny here as well, keeping an eye on the chat. So we are an independent volunteer-run charity, but currently looking to actually incorporate into a community benefit society so that we can do even more. And we set up in 2015 out of the York and Transition movement because we were people who got together and wanted to find local ways to tackle climate change. And our main priority is promoting community energy, be it saving energy on a sort of community scale or making it from renewables. Tonight, we are looking at the saving energy side of things, and that's mostly our Warmer Homes York project. And the reason why we're looking at that is because we know that around 36% of carbon emissions in York come from housing, and only around 36% of York homes are what's called well insulated, which actually by probably future standards, they will need upgrading further because they are probably not really climate resilient enough and could do even better on the energy performance. And we think that retrofitting of homes is crucial to achieving emissions targets. Our aim is to get more care homes insulated and to help kickstart a market for home retrofit in the city, because at the moment there isn't much of that going on. And sort of some of the things that we've been doing, obviously mostly before lockdown and before COVID hit, but we have been doing things throughout as well. So we've been raising awareness through stalls and events. We've held a housewarming party, so a DIY workshop, which under the guidance of experienced insulation installer Andy Walker, insulated a suspended timber floor, which happens to be the one that I'm actually currently sitting on. And we aim to do more when it's possible to do things like that again, because it is a good way to share skills and to sort of improve houses along the way. We lend out a thermal imaging camera to our members, or when it's possible to do so, we actually offer a survey so that we can help people find out where their homes are leaking heat. And as you can see, it's quite fun to point a thermal imaging camera at people as well. That was the climate strike last autumn. And you can see lots of passionate people there. We've also been learning how to deliver whole house assessments from Andy, who's had years of experience of doing so. And for now, we can only recommend his or other assessor services so that you can see sort of assess your house with view to further improvements. But we aim to be able to provide that service ourselves, and we have a few people in training for that. The last photo is from our previous draft proofing workshop, which was held at St. Nick's at the Environment Centre, and we were actually getting trained by Anika from Carbon Co-op. So that's a bit about us and who we are. And now that you know that, it would be great to know a little bit about you, where you're coming from for this workshop tonight and what your sort of knowledge level is. So I'd like to ask Tom to share the quick poll, so nothing. And if you could please fill that in, that would be very useful, just to look at who else is in the room. Hopefully you should be able to see that now.
We're getting some answers in, so yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And it's looking like we're getting a spread of skills, which is good. Can everyone see the poll? I'll just give it a few more seconds.
We've had a comment pointing out that the third question shouldn't be mandatory because obviously people haven't installed.
Yeah,
Sorry
about that.
Why? Probably not, but we'll take the third one with a pinch of salt, maybe.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yes, there's an art to setting these polls, I think, and yeah, it can be tricky to get them right. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay, thank you very much. So it looks like we have a bit of a spread of people who have some experience of draft proofing and others who haven't, and even some very proficient people. So we definitely want to be hearing from you more, and people who have tried it and others who haven't. So thank you very much. That kind of gives us a bit of sort of knowing. I think we are pitching this workshop at the right level, which is great to know. So now just to kind of provide a bit of context. Sorry. Why? So draft proofing obviously is one way. Sorry, I seem to have there. I should be able to enlarge the screen again. So draft proofing is one way to address the poor energy efficiency levels that we have in the UK, but it's certainly nowhere near enough to crack the tough nut, because we know that housing accounts for around 30% of all of UK's energy consumption. Domestic heating contributes 20% of all carbon emissions. So those figures matter because UK homes are amongst the least energy efficient in Western Europe. So properly insulating them would be a big win on both carbon reductions, improving well-being and health, creating jobs, and reducing fuel poverty as well. It's a massive win-win, and it's a big job, of course. So while draft proofing is a very good start, and from that picture on the right, you can see sort of roughly that through drafts, we lose somewhere between 15 to 20% of heat, which may not sound like that much necessarily, but it is significant. And it is also fairly cheap to address, and it is a great way to explore your house while planning for some bigger, more major interventions as part of a whole house plan. So this is why we're keen on sort of people learning to draft proof their homes. And what we're doing is we've been inspired by the People Powered Retrofit project of Carbon Co-op, which is energy services and advocacy cooperative based in Manchester. And we sort of aim to emulate that in York, and we've been drawing on their expertise, including for this workshop. So now, what can we achieve by draft proofing? So a draft has a sort of a similar effect in your house as the wind chill. So on windy days, the temperature may be quite high, but the air movement of the wind makes it feel colder than it actually is. And draft has a similar effect inside your house, but it's sort of 24/7. So by eradicating the draft, you should be able to lower the thermostat while achieving the same comfort as the room with higher heat and the draft. So you should be saving energy and money as well. But is that always true? And the results will vary depending on different circumstances. If we draft proof, we are likely to be warmer and more comfortable. And if we include ventilation, we will also create a healthy indoor environment. However, we may not necessarily use less energy and lower the bills unless we actually can turn the thermostat down. And for people who are underheating their homes, turning the thermostat down to save money is not advisable, because we should be living in homes that are in at least 18 degrees or 22, depending on the health condition and age. So in a case like that, draft proofing will keep the home warmer without increasing bills, but it will not necessarily reduce them. So that's just to set some sort of expectations on draft proofing. And of course, a very important function of draft proofing is helping to protect the house fabric, so that's your walls and floors, by stopping warm, humid air from getting in and potentially causing damage. Now, before we move on to looking at drafts in some more detail, I thought I should mention a potential source of financial help with paying for energy efficiency improvements, which you may have heard about, the Green Homes Grant Scheme. Thanks to which, at least in theory, any homeowner in England, including landlords, can get up to £5,000 towards part of the cost of energy saving measures, such as installation, insulation, or draft proofing. Low-income households can get 100% of the costs of work, up to £10,000. However, there's a health warning on this because there are a lot of conditions for successfully claiming the grant. Measures have to be installed by accredited installers, and there are not many of them, especially not in York. So we've been hearing reports of people not being able to actually find an installer. Also, the measures are divided into primary and secondary measures, and draft proofing is in the secondary measures. And if you don't have any primary measures to carry out, then you can't get secondary measures funded. So it is a little bit complicated, and there's not enough installers out there. But if you have other work planned, then it is possibly worth having a go at applying and seeing if you can find some installers. And there is definitely hope and some pressure applied on the government to extend the scheme beyond the intended end date of March 2021 to give more installers the incentive to get accredited, because it is quite a complex process. You could add to those voices by supporting the Climate Coalition's 10-point plan for green recovery, and we'll be sharing a link for how to do that. But there are lots of other groups that you might want to sort of support in calling for that as well. So take your pick, but if you can, please apply pressure on the politicians to extend the scheme and to give the installers incentive to get accredited, so that we can actually get more of this work done. So let's look at what are drafts and how do we find them. So one way to look at drafts is that they basically represent uncontrolled ventilation that is on 24/7. And keeping drafts out improves the airtightness of a building. Now, that may not sound like a desirable quality for a good home, but it's actually incredibly important. It basically means removing any airflows caused by gaps and cracks in the building fabric, so that's your walls, roof, floors, and other structural parts, because warm air escapes through those and cold air comes in, and that both reduces comfort and increases energy bills and reduces energy efficiency of the house. Obviously, still need to ensure a good air supply, but that is best done with controllable ventilation rather than uncontrolled drafts. And let's see quite how bad, or how big a problem this is. So let's imagine that you could combine all of the gaps and drafts in your home into one big hole, which is permanently open. And what would that look like? So if you have a house that is built to building regulation standard, which should be quite good, you would think, then you would have then this sort of leakage shouldn't be bigger than 10 cubic meters of air escaping per hour for every square meter. There's a lot more technical detail to this. I am simplifying, but imagine it's 10 cubic meters of air escaping from your house. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't like to have a big hole like that in my house. And according to the podcast that's sort of referenced at the bottom of the page, a lot of houses are actually worse than this. Quite a lot of houses are performing even worse than the sort of building standards, which are relatively minimum. On the other hand, highly efficient passive house standard houses, so houses built to a really high spec, lets out about 10 times less. So so usually less than 1 cubic meter of air. And that equates to having a credit card sized hole in your house, which I think is a lot more preferable. And certainly a good aim for most homes is somewhere between 3 and 5. And that is a target that is well worth bearing in mind where you make any improvements to your home. Clearly, draft proofing alone will not plug all those massive holes, so to speak, but it is certainly a jolly good way to make a start. And if you want to properly insulate your house, then you may want to test it and find out just how much it actually leaks and what the target that you work towards could or should be. So that's to give a little bit of an overview. And now let's get a bit more in detail. So what sort of gaps are we talking about? What is it that we want to be filling? So some of these hopefully will already be quite obvious. So it's gaps around doors or ill-fitting windows. Loft hatches are very good, definitely good to look at. Letterboxes, keyholes, skirting junctions, pipework entry, and we'll go through these in some more detail and how to actually draft proof them a bit later on. And most of these you can just fill at will, and it will be a great way to improve airtightness of your home. We will talk a bit about unused chimneys later because there is a little bit of caution needed there. You don't necessarily want to be blocking a chimney completely, but Tom will talk you through that bit. And there's also things like cracks in plaster. Plaster is actually one of your airtightness levels. It's important to sort of, you can actually get quite a bit of air coming through cracks in those. Around extractor fans, they are not always well fitted. Plug sockets, light fittings. It's worth sort of looking at all these places. There are, however, some gaps that you definitely don't want to be filling. You do want to keep these types of holes. So ventilation in heated space, trickle vents, extractor fans, or vents in rooms with fuel burning appliances. So if you've got a wood burning stove in your house, you have to provide ventilation, a source of air for the stove. So those are definitely not to be blocked without due care. Most likely never, but it is definitely something to bear in mind. Structural ventilation, so air bricks, again, especially under suspended timber floors, which needs to be ventilated underneath to prevent the joists rotting. So and around loft eaves. So there are places where you should keep them open. And now, how do you find these the drafts? So there's different ways, starting from the obvious, hopefully, just observe, because it's easy to because we live in our homes and we're here every day, it is easy to actually sort of be so used to it that you don't necessarily notice things anymore. So try and look at your home with new eyes, and have a think, what is the coldest room? Does one room feel more drafty than the other? Does one of them feel stuffy? Because that's also worth noticing. What's the prevailing wind direction? Does that affect how much air comes in and how cold you get to feel in your house? Have a look around you. The second option is, also use your while you're doing that, use your senses. So look out for any visible gaps, feel for drafts, use the back of your hand. Have a listen. Can you hear the outside a lot more from in one room than in the other? It might be that the seals on the windows are not very good. So have a proper good poke around your house and around all those places that I've mentioned, sort of from around windows, doors, and ventilation grills and building services, and sort of have a listen, hear and feel. And then if you want to, and of course, one thing to bear in mind is if you've already got some draft proofing measures installed, how old are they? Do they actually need refreshing? Are they still doing the job that they were installed to do? That's very worth looking at. And then if you like, you can also get more high tech. So starting with smoke pen or incense sticks, which you may already have in your house, and that's quite a good way to see if you might have seen an incense stick in the chimney sort of picture earlier. That's a very good way to see which way the wind is blowing, so to speak. And if you want to get a bit more involved, then you could borrow a thermal imaging camera from us. And put simply, a thermal imaging camera allows you to see an object's heat radiating, and the camera translates it into different shades of color. So it lets you see how much heat is radiating compared to objects around it. So in this case, the sort of blue and purple colors in the picture on the right indicate cold temperatures, while warmer colors all the way to white, so from red all the way to white, indicate warmer colors or warmer surface temperatures. So that's one way, and we are happy to lend our camera out to members, and when it's possible, we'll offer the sort of option to have someone go round as well. And if you want to go one step further, then a blower door test is another way to look at to determine airtightness of a building and help identify any sort of leakages in the building fabric. But the test is not cheap. It is something that you would do if you're planning some major retrofit works, or if you want to check on how well a house is performing. Ideally, all new homes should be tested like this. All new buildings should be. But it is something that, yeah, you would probably only invest in if you are planning some major works. Now, whichever method of draft finding you choose, there are some key principles that you need to bear in mind before you rush and plug those gaps that you discover. And this is my hand over to Peter. So I'll stop sharing and you can have a little break whilst Peter takes over the screen.
Puts himself up. I think I want to share this one. Can you see that, everyone?
Yep.
Good. Okay, so in this section of the event, what I'd like to do is look perhaps at a bit more of the physics of what's going on. I want to look at the causes of drafts and then consider what else we might need to bear in mind when we're dealing with our drafts. And it's natural in a cold dominated climate like ours to focus on the unwanted cold air, but there are a couple of properties of warm air that we need to bear in mind. So first of all, warm air can hold more water vapor than cold air. In the big wide world, this gives us our weather, because when warm air cools, then the water vapor condenses into clouds, mist, or rain. And yeah, if you go indoors and this condensation is happening, you can get black mold. And mold where you see it is bad enough, but it becomes a bigger problem if that mold is beginning to form actually inside the structure of your house, under the floors, in the woodwork, and so on. That will give you big problems in 5 or 10 years' time. And the other important property of warm air is that when it rises, cold air moves in to take its place. So when we light a fire, it's warm air that carries the smoke and combustion up the chimney stack, and cool air is actually drawn in to replace it. This circulation happens at a large scale. It can happen within a building, and it can even happen within a room. So let's look at what happens when it's happening on a large scale. So if the weather's windy and some of that wind is blowing into one side of your house and out the other, you've definitely got some draft problems. However, you might have some other problems that are much higher priority. If that wind is coming in because you've got bad pointing, or someone's drilled a hole in the wall to put a pipe through and not sealed it properly, if the seals around windows and doors aren't working properly, then that wind that's coming in might be bringing in water with it. And if that water's getting into the structure of the house, then that's not good. So your very first step is to weatherproof the house first. Okay, let's take a closer look at draughts and where it's best to seal them. So air that's circulating through the building is normally described as the chimney or stack effect, where warm air is escaping through the top of your house and cold air is being drawn in the bottom. We needed a lot of insulation. We needed a lot of ventilation like this in the good old days of coal fires, because coal fires need a lot of oxygen, and also you need to make sure that all the air is ventilated out the chimney and you don't get smoke being blown back into the house. So if you're in an old house, you'll have a lot of natural ventilation that was put in the days of coal fires. However, since then, we've begun to replace our coal fires with central heating. They've got balanced flues, and a lot of this ventilation we don't need anymore. And so you've got a balance to draw. A leaky house with all this uncontrolled air movement isn't energy efficient. But then again, if you seal it up too tightly, you'll have damp, stale air in the house, which is a health problem. So the stack or chimney effect can actually circulate air within a building. Here's a nice picture of a boiler. It's in a bathroom on the 3rd floor of a house, and there are pipes coming up through the house, linking the boiler to the radiators all the way down on the ground floor. And they create a very strong pull of air up through the house, which then comes out here and disappears off back down the stairs to be drawn back up again by this strong pull of air. The way they've dealt with this is to interrupt the flow of air by cutting out a seal that they've put round on the floor here. And that cut the draughts in this house by about 20%. And the draughts can also happen within a room. Okay, this is one of those thermal imaging cameras. And what we've got is a window at the top here, a bay window, and underneath it, we've got a chair. I hope you can see that. And as Ivana was saying earlier, this kind of blue-black area is the cold area. So there's some of it around the window and there's some of it around the back of the seat here. But if we focus on what's happening around the window, this is a good sign that cold air, or rather your warmth from your house, is being conducted out of the house through the window glass and through the window frame. What that will cause, if you remember, if warm air from the room hits this cold area, the water in it will condense, so you get a lot of condensation around windows. It will cool down and begin to drop. Anyone sat underneath this window will be able to feel that cold air coming down off the window, and then when it's warmed up again, it'll go back and dump a bit more water against the window and create this draft that comes down. Do I want to say anything about that? Okay, the way that people have dealt with that in the past, or since the 1950s, is to put radiators underneath windows. So builders and architects will often put radiators where these cold drafts are coming in, and very often underneath windows. And that's just a kind of fix that still means that you've got big heating bills. The answer will be, I think, by 2050, we'll need to replace these windows ultimately with triple glazed high performance windows. But in the meantime, maybe you can put curtains up. Maybe Tom will have some ideas when we get to Tom's section of it. Let's look down at this seat area now. As Ivana was saying earlier, the thermal imaging camera can't actually picture the drafts, but it can indicate that there's cold air blowing over a surface because it makes the surface cold. And these kind of feathered areas where they move from cold to warmer gradually is a good sign that there's a draft blowing through the house and over this surface. Now this draft, I would guess, well, if I was using this chair, I guess normally I'd sorry, I had a little bit of beep there. If I was using this chair and I wanted to fix these drafts, I'd probably put a cushion or something along the back. But in my heart of hearts, I know that I need to properly deal with that draft, take the chair out and seal. But what I suspect is that this draft is probably coming up from underneath a wooden suspended floor. And I might well fill the gaps in that floor, but because the air is moving right across the whole ground floor of the house, that draft will just find somewhere else to come out. Or if it's already coming out somewhere else, it'll come out even faster. And that creates a problem for us. We can try and stop these drafts, but unless we've done a thorough job, then unless we've done a thorough job and got rid of the drafts at source, then we just move the problem from one place to another problem for you to actually deal with. Okay. So before you rush out and decide that you're going to seal up all the underfloor vents, we need to look at ventilation and we need to look at how you deal with water vapor. There's an excellent video being produced because there's organizations out in the world, well, out in Britain anyway, where ventilation and water vapor is such a serious problem. There are organizations that are looking purely at this problem, and this particular one here have produced this video, which I would recommend that you actually go away and see. If we've got time to see it here, we'll see it here, but you'll get a copy of these notes, and there's the link to the video itself. So Ivana, have we got time to watch this video?
Yes, I think so, definitely.
Brilliant. I've been rushing so that we could. Here we go.
Worried about damp and mould? Don't panic. Help is at hand. First off, we need to understand what the problem is. Damp and mould are caused by an excess of moisture and can create problems for our health and for our buildings. However, just like our bodies, we need some moisture in our houses in order for them to function well. So we need a balanced amount of moisture to keep a healthy home. Moisture can create problems in your home through the many forms water can take. When water freezes, it expands into solid ice, which can burst uninsulated pipework. Liquid water from leaks or flooding can lead to damp in the floors or walls. If your guttering becomes blocked, then rainwater can overflow, saturating your walls in specific areas, sometimes even leaking through to the inside. But the most important form we want to discuss here is water as a gas, water vapour. Whilst we're all used to the sight of steam from a boiling kettle, most water vapour is not so easy to spot. There is always water vapour in the air around us. We produce it when we breathe, along with any animals or plants in our home, and also through daily activities such as cooking and washing. If there was no water vapour in the air, then nothing would be able to live. Okay, so here's the technical bit. At different temperatures, air can hold different amounts of water vapour. The warmer the air is, the more moisture it can hold, known as its holding capacity. But when there is more water vapour than can be held by the air, it becomes full up and condenses into liquid water. Outside of your home, this is how rain is formed. This also happens when warm, moisture-rich air meets a cold surface, like a single glazed window in your home during winter. Condensation forms as the air suddenly cools against the surface and the holding capacity of the air is reduced. Because air can hold different amounts of moisture at different temperatures, we measure how full the air is by something called relative humidity. If we have 100% relative humidity, then the air is full up and the vapour becomes liquid water. But even when there is no condensation, high relative humidity can be uncomfortable and lead to mould and other problems. At the other end of the scale, air with 0% relative humidity is excessively, and in fact, impossibly dry and uninhabitable. We need a relative humidity of somewhere between 40% and 65% for most of the time for the building atmosphere to be pleasant and healthy. So we come back to balance. Not too dry and not too moist. Where does the moisture in your house come from? Outside of the home, the most obvious answer is rain. Good construction is vital to avoid water entering a building from the roof, walls and windows, along with suitable ground drainage in the case of flooding. Inside, we have our direct uses of water in our daily lives, washing and drying clothes, cooking and bathing. All these produce visible liquid water and large amounts of not so visible water vapour. Next, we have the organisms within the home: human, animal and plant. All of us produce water vapour as we breathe, or plant breathe. If the number of people, pets or plants changes, the balance of moisture within your home may change dramatically. Remember how hot and humid the air gets at busy parties. But you didn't have a problem before. What's changed? For damp and mould to appear in your home, you need an excess of moisture, visible or not, that leads to an imbalance. What has changed? Has something stopped working? Has the weather changed? Or have you changed the way you live? Or have you made improvements to your home? Home improvements need attention to detail, and sometimes they can put things out of balance. For example, improving windows or insulation is great for heat retention, but if the installation leaves gaps, it can create colder areas, called cold bridges, where the moisture can condense and mould can grow. If you draft-proof your home but ventilation is not also considered, then moisture levels can rise and push the house out of balance. So a good ventilation strategy is needed. Different types of building in different locations need different approaches in order to maintain balance. Older buildings deal with moisture in a different way to newer ones, so require a different approach when renovations or changes are made. Buildings in windy, wet places often have different kinds of materials and design. If we don't take these into account when we change things, we can end up creating more problems. What to do about it? There's a lot to think about, but the key is to hold on to the idea of balance. The balance between the water, outside and in, your house, and your activities. Firstly, understand your building and how it was designed to work and stay healthy. Try to understand the building as a whole: fabric, services, occupants, and its context, as all these factors are connected. Try to stop any excess water getting into your home, from the roof, windows, walls, or foundations, and also the internal plumbing. Check for leaks, missing tiles on the roof, broken seals around windows, and cracks in the render. This is obvious, but not always straightforward. Simple maintenance is always a good starting point. Try to reduce the excess moisture from your activities within the home, for example, by keeping lids on pans or drying clothes outside. This is not always easy in winter or if you have limited space, but do what you can. Finally, make sure the water vapour generated in your home stays at a healthy level through proper heating to increase the holding capacity in the air, and good ventilation to get rid of excess vapour. Try to understand your home's ventilation system if it has one. This can mean opening windows when you know an excess of vapour is being created. It's easier to heat your house if it's well insulated, of course, but remember that a consistent approach should be taken so that you don't have an imbalance of warm and cold surfaces. One more thing. Don't worry about little bits of damp or mould, particularly around windows or in showers and bathrooms. It's quite normal, especially in extreme weather conditions. Sometimes there is not much you can do except wipe the water or mould away. Just keep an eye on things and ask an expert if you're not sure. To learn more about the causes of damp and the balance of actions, check out our tool here. Living in a balanced home is good for the health of the building, its occupants, and their wallets.
So I've watched that video any number of times, and it's always good to take note of things that you missed the previous time. Again, you're looking at balance, you're looking at being thorough. So as the video suggested, install extractors in the wet rooms, like the kitchen and bathrooms, maybe a utility room too. And always make sure that you've got plenty of, or you've got fresh air coming in to balance the stale air that you're taking out. And take the whole house into account. You need to, for instance, ventilate bedrooms. That the carbon dioxide level in bedrooms overnight can reach quite amazing proportions and leave you feeling awful in the morning. It isn't always the drink the night before, it's sometimes carbon dioxide that's done it to you too. And if you want to monitor your humidity and temperature, there are many sort of nice and easy small gadgets available. They'll turn up in various shops down the centre of Lidl and Aldi, for instance, at times. And buying one of these simple meters, maybe over the internet, will allow you to keep a daily check on your humidity and on the temperature of your rooms. Oh, I think that's a lot for my bit. I'm looking forward now to are we going to take a break, Ivana? Hello?
Yes, if you move on to the next slide.
Okay. We'll take a 10-minute break. As well as making it a comfort break, maybe you could give some thought to the draft proofing measures you're considering. And the next section will be by Tom, where he'll be covering the actual materials that we can use to draft proof our homes. Okay, shutting down for 10 minutes.
Okay, so hopefully we're on the right track here then. So yeah, I'll hand over to Tom. So we'll look at the, how we actually do some draft proofing, and when Tom's done his presentation, then we'll take some questions, and hopefully some of them might get answered in Tom's presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ivana. Can you see my slides okay?
Yep.
Lovely. Yeah, so we've talked about the the theory of it and the principles and things. So we're going to look at some practical examples now of what you can do in specific bits of your house. So first of all, so chimneys are quite a big source of drafts, being a massive hole in your house. And as we talked about earlier, we've got the chimney effect. So hot air or warm air in your room is just kind of sucked straight up and out of the house. Obviously, that's not ideal. There are various things we can do about this, and it kind of depends whether you want to temporarily block your chimney or permanently block it. So first of all, so let's say you want to use your chimney sometimes, you don't want it blocked all year round. There's various sort of temporary things you can use. So this thing on the right here is called a chimney sheep, and it's actually made from sheep's wool. And it's really good. You just kind of stuff it up the chimney, and it kind of rests in place. They get different sizes of them, so you find the right size one for your chimney, and it just kind of stays in place and provides a nice little blockage to stop all the air rushing out. And then you got this big long handle, which is great because that sticks down at the bottom. So then you can actually see when you're sat in the room, you can kind of see it sort of dangling in the fireplace, and that just reminds you that it's there, so you don't accidentally start a fire with it still blocking the chimney, because that would be very bad. There's other products as well. So there's something called a chimney balloon, which, as the name suggests, is just kind of an inflatable sort of plastic bag effectively, and you sort of put it in the chimney and you inflate it, and then it gets kind of wedged in the gap. And so similar kind of idea really. And then if you're really stuck, or if you just don't want to spend any money on it, then maybe you've got a whole bunch of plastic bags at home, stick them all together, put them in the chimney, job done. Obviously, don't forget they're there, because that would be really bad if you started a fire. So all of these kind of things like chimney sheep and chimney balloon, and there's a few other ones as well. They're all pretty cheap. They're all in the sort of £20 region, or maybe a bit less. So it's a pretty useful temporary solution. And we can see here, so we've got these pictures that Ivana showed earlier. So this is a disused gas fire, and it's got a vent at the top, which is obviously very important if the fire's in use. But we can see from the smoke that just means that the air is getting sucked up through the vent there. So that's all your warm air just going straight out the house. And we can see here on the infrared images of the same fire, there's a big cold spot where the vent is. So we can see the effect that's having. And then on the right here, now we've blocked that with insulation. We can see from the smoke that there's no longer that strong current of air. And again, on the infrared, we can see that it's looking a lot warmer now. So we can really see the effects there. In terms of, if you're looking for more kind of permanent solutions, if you've got a chimney that you're not going to use at all, you're quite happy to have it permanently blocked up, you can get it properly blocked, or you can get a chimney removed altogether, in fact. Obviously, if you're going to go down this route, then you need to be a lot more careful about it, and you're going to need to get a builder involved as well. So ventilation is still important. We've kind of talked about ventilation a bit already, but you do still need to provide a bit of ventilation. So a builder will be the best person to speak to, see how to safely block a chimney and still give it a little bit of ventilation, so you don't get condensation build up and then end up with mold problems, damp problems as well. Yeah, I think that's all I was going to say on that. So if you have a stove that goes up through a chimney, then obviously you might have some drafts involved there. So normally with a stove, you would have the flue pipe going up the chimney, and then you'd have a register plate around the flue pipe. So essentially the whole cavity of the chimney is blocked, except for, there'll be a hole in the register plate for the flue to go through. But it might not be well sealed, so you could still be getting some drafts there, in which case you need to seal it up with fire cement, and it's very important that you use the right mastic, because that flue pipe will get very, very hot. So you need something which can withstand those high temperatures. So fire cement is the way to go. But again, if in doubt, talk to a professional. Okay, so then we move on to loft hatches. And so loft hatches are essentially a door into a cold space. So if you think about, in your loft, assuming you don't have a sort of room in roof loft, sorry, then you probably have, a very cold space up there. And well, assuming it's well insulated, then the air in the loft should be a lot colder than the air in the rest of your house. So then your loft hatch becomes a kind of weak point in that insulation. So there's a number of factors here. So we'll talk briefly about insulation. Obviously, we're focusing on draft proofing, but it's worth saying that the loft hatch itself should be insulated, because otherwise you've got this layer of insulation going across the floor of the whole loft. And then you've got this one spot where there's no insulation. So that's obviously a thermal bridge there, or a cold bridge. So you can put mineral wool on the back of the loft door, or sheep's wool insulation, which you can get, or even some kind of foam insulation board like Kingspan or Celotex or something like that. And then in addition to that, we've got to think about around the edges of the loft hatch. So that's where you've got, where your loft hatch is coming into contact with the frame, and it might not be a particularly good seal. So there might be some little gaps around there where cold air can get through, or your warm air can escape into the loft. So that's where we think about sealing it up. So you can get these rubber draft strips, and you can get them all. They're all in different sizes. So you kind of look at the size of the gap that you've got in your loft hatch, and find the appropriate strips to match that size. And they're basically just rubber strips. You put them all around the inside of the frame, and then the door of the loft hatch just sort of presses against them and squashes them down, and that just makes a nice seal and stops all the air from moving. The other thing you've got to be aware of as well is that when the wind is kind of howling through your loft, it can lift up the loft hatch. So that's why we need these catches as well. So we put catches on the underside and on top as well. And that just holds the door in place. So when that wind comes blowing through, it's going to keep the door in place, and it's not going to lift up and then let all that warm air through. Okay, so onto windows, and we'll start with wooden framed windows. A lot of the stuff about windows is quite similar regardless, but so the main things to look out for are, with wooden windows, you've got to watch out for the bit between the window itself and the reveal. You can get cracks and gaps there, and it might be that you've got some sealant to cover those up, but it might have degraded over time, so it's worth just fixing that up, reapplying it if it's there, or just applying it completely from scratch. Put draft strips on the inside of the window frame so that the window closes nicely against the strips. So similar idea to the loft hatch. And make sure you haven't got sort of loose handles and things like that, handles and hinges kind of hanging off, because they will let air through as well. Also be aware that you can get gaps underneath the windowsill itself, so between the windowsill and the wall. So that might be something else that you need to look at sealing up. And you may even find, and we found this in our house, that you can get gaps between the window frame and the wall itself. So we stripped some wallpaper in a bedroom to redo it, and that kind of revealed this quite significant gap at the top of the window frame. And you could actually see out into the street through the gap. So you think you've got this nice window keeping all the heat in your room and stopping air from escaping, and then you've got this big gap. So it's worth looking at that as well. And you can get window repair people to come and fill up that gap for you. So yeah, so just things to be aware of there. With uPVC windows, it's pretty much the same thing. The main difference is that usually you'll find that the uPVC windows already have the seals on the inside of the frame, but it might be that they've perished, or that the bits have been picked off or something. So worth looking at that, and if they need replacing, then get them replaced. And again, it's the same thing as before. So sealant between the window and the reveal. And just making sure all the hinges and handles and things are still on correctly. In particular, if you've got a hinge which isn't screwed in tightly, then that will that your actual window won't be completely straight, and that in itself can cause gaps to appear as well. So just things to watch out for there. With sash windows, it's a bit trickier, just because of the nature of the windows. But what we can do is we can put brush strips or brush seals on the edges. So you can put brush seals on the sides of the windows, where they brush against the frame, and then you've got the bit at the top of the bottom pane of the window, if that makes sense, the bit where the two panes kind of meet in the middle, and you can put brushes on there as well, and then that just bridges that little gap between the two panes. Or if you want to go for a more temporary measure, you can just get you can even make or buy a sort of mini draft excluder, like a sausage dog style draft excluder, and you can just plonk that on the top to cover up the gap. And that might be a better option if because it's quite seasonal. in terms of you probably want to have the windows closed pretty much all the time during autumn and winter, and then you'll be opening and closing them a lot more during spring and summer. So it just means it's just a nice temporary thing that you can put there, and then it's easy to take off again. Another thing to think about, and Peter kind of hinted at this earlier, is about this whole idea of, unless you've got really good windows like triple glazed, or maybe some super high quality recent double glazed windows, you'll probably find that the windows in your house are quite a sort of cold surface, and in fact it almost feels like they're radiating cold into the room, which is not ideal, and actually it's a big source of perceived thermal discomfort. So we really notice it. We really notice that kind of cold air sort of creeping across the room from the windows. So one thing you can do to combat that is you can get thermal curtains, and I think these are quite underrated, really. But so just very sort of thick curtains, basically, and the idea is you cover up the whole window, so you put them in front of the window. And the thing about curtains is they impede airflow. Basically, they disrupt airflow. So all that cold air that's sort of trying to escape from the window is going to get trapped behind the curtain. So it's all just going to stay between the window and the curtain. Basically, it's going to stop it from escaping out into your room and making you feel cold. Obviously, you need to make sure that the whole window area is covered by the curtain. Otherwise, it will just sort of escape out the sides. So make sure you got good coverage, and make sure that you don't cover the radiator as well, because in the same way as we're trapping the cold air behind the curtain, if you put it over the radiator, you'll trap the hot air as well. So your radiator will just be failing to heat the room. So it's just, if you can do, it's good to have a shelf over the top that sort of overlaps the top of your radiator, and then the curtain can kind of rest on the shelf, and then there's no risk of the curtain sort of going further down and covering the radiator. So that's one way to do it. And then down at the bottom here, we've got these thermal leak detectors. So these are really good little gadgets. You just point them at the surface and it tells you the temperature of the surface, and it's got color coding. It's got a color coded light that it shines, so you can see whether it's hot or cold or kind of in between. And you can see here, so we're pointing at the window, and we can see that the temperature reading is 12.5 degrees Celsius, which is pretty cold. And then we close the curtain in front of it and try again, and now it says 17.8 degrees. So it's a big difference. So the thermal curtains really do make a big difference. And if you would like to borrow a thermal leak detector, you can talk to St. Nick's. So Ivana is here tonight with York Community Energy, but she wears many hats, and is also involved with St. Nick's, and they do have a few of these to lend out. So do let us know if you want to borrow one. Okay, so with doors, obviously we want to draft-proof and weatherproof exterior doors, but you might also consider some of your internal doors if they're leading to cold spaces like cellars and garages and attics and things like that. Obviously, these spaces won't be as cold as outside, but they're still unheated spaces, and often, not particularly draft-proofed in themselves. So there's still a source of cold air and a source of movement of cold air coming into the rest of your house. So the kind of things we can do, again, we can use rubber seals. We can put seals around the frames of the door, presses on the seals. And in this case, you want to make sure that when you close the door that it does press tightly against the seal, because if it's not pressing tightly, then it's not doing its job. The other thing that you might consider is that you can get air coming in behind the door frame, so between the door frame and the wall. So you can use silicone sealant around the architrave, or if you get a bit more adventurous, you can take the whole architrave off, and then that will reveal a lot more of the wall behind it, and you might find a lot more gaps. And then you can use air tightness tape or expanding foam to plug those gaps, and then put the architrave back And that might be a job for you to do, or it might be for a handy person, depending on how adventurous you're feeling. And then we've got all manner of other things that you can do with doors. So we've got your traditional brush strips here. So you can put these at the bottom of your door. And so they will just stop the drafts from coming under through the bottom bit just underneath your door. But they still allow for movement of the door. When you open and close it, they just brush against the floor. Similarly, we've got a similar kind of idea for letterboxes. So you just put that over the back of your letterbox, and then that just stops the drafts coming through. You can even get brushes for keyholes. So if you've sealed up everything else, then you can still go further and you can still do the keyhole, or you can just get a traditional keyhole cover, depending. And then these are for sort of draft proofing and weatherproofing. So you basically got these sort of rubber seals here, rubber strips, and then you've got a metal bit, and the metal bit attaches to your door frame, and then that the rubber seal will just kind of overlap the door. So when the door's closed, the gaps around the edge of the door will be covered by the seals. And that's great because it stops drafts from getting in, but it will also stop any driving rain from creeping through the gaps in your door as well. And very helpfully, Cumbria Action for Sustainability have got a YouTube channel, and in fact they've got a whole playlist dedicated to fitting draft proofing measures. So you can go and have a look at those, but they've got all kinds of helpful videos on how to install a lot of these things. And we will be sending out links at the end, and you'll be getting the slides as well. So don't worry about sort of scribbling down these ridiculous URLs at the moment. We'll send out all the information afterwards, but there's a whole wealth of videos on there. So I do highly recommend you go and have a look. So then pipe work. So you've got lots of pipes going around your house, obviously, and going through walls. And where they go through walls, you've got holes in the walls, which again can be a source of drafts. So seal up those gaps where you find them, or ask a handy person to do it. And yeah, just bear in mind as well that this is a picture of the pipes connected to a boiler here. And the pipes nearest to the boiler, obviously a lot of the pipes are carrying hot water, and the pipes nearest the boiler are going to be carrying the hottest water. So if they are uninsulated, they're going to be radiating a lot of heat. And our friend Andy Walker at Shore Insulation says that 6 meters of uninsulated copper pipe is the same as having a 500-watt radiator trying to heat the outside of your house, i.e. not very useful. Big waste of energy. So again, it's not really draft proofing per se, but make sure that your pipes are lagged. So you can just get foam lagging to go around your pipes, and that will just provide a bit of insulation, and that will mean that the hot water is staying in the pipes and not just being radiated away uselessly. If you are going to seal around pipes, then this expanding foam is recommended, the Ilbrook FM330, because it is actually airtight as long as you don't cut it. If you do go for another brand, then you might need to put airtightness tape on as well, or the polyfiller or tiling adhesive, just to really sort of seal up that gap. If you are looking at outdoor holes, so holes on the outside of your house, then you might need to use mortar as well, because expanding foam does degrade when exposed to sunlight. So just something to consider there. Okay, so on to suspended timber floors. Now, these can be a big source of heat loss, and not something that you necessarily realise, but especially, yeah, so suspended timber floors, you can get these, gaps in between the floorboards. And so that is, you've got a load of cold air underneath, which is kind of rushing through underneath your floor. So any gaps you've got in the floorboards there, that air is going to come through and make the rest of your room feel quite cold. So it can be a big job to deal with these, but there are some DIY measures, and we'll have a look at them in a second. But yeah, so stopgap, yeah, we'll move on and you can see. So you've got, so this is called draughts, and it's basically these little rubber strips, and you kind of shove them in between your floorboards and then press them down with this applicator. So that's just, it's like a temporary seal kind of idea. So you can pull it up if you want to later. So yes, that's quite a simple solution. There's a thing called stopgap as well, which is it's like a strip of kind of V-shaped plastic. So it's a similar kind of idea, and you kind of push that down into the gaps, and again, it does the same kind of job. If you want to go really DIY or arts and crafts, you can go for, you know, paper mache, put paper mache in the gaps. Or we've got these things called slivers as well. So these are just thin strips of wood, and they've got a triangular cross section, which means that again, you just kind of wedge them in the gap, and then you can kind of hammer them down further so they get well and truly stuck in the gap. And you can see in the picture there, they've been kind of hammered in, wedged in. They do stick out a bit on top, so then the idea is that you would then sand the floor afterwards. So this is a good sort of job to do in combination with a floor that needs sanding already. So you just sand the whole floor, and that will just brush off that top layer of wood, and then you'll be left with some beautiful floorboards that also are nice and draft proofed. So there's lots of options there. You can go one step further than draft proofing. You could actually insulate under the suspended timber floor. We do occasionally stray onto insulating topics as well, because it is a topic close to our heart. So this is actually Ivana's house, and we did what we call a DIY housewarming party, where we assembled a group of volunteers at Ivana's house, and Andy Walker from Shore Insulation came along, and he kind of guided us to how to insulate a suspended timber floor. And basically what you do is you pull up the floorboards, you build a sort of wooden lattice underneath. So you kind of suspend a wooden lattice, just thin strips of wood in a sort of crisscross pattern, suspend it from underneath the joists, and then you kind of make a gap then, which you fill with insulation. So just, you know, normal mineral wool in this case. And then you put the floorboards back afterwards, and you can see here that the finished product. In fact, Ivana decided to go for some tongue and groove floorboards that interlock nicely. So then the whole draft proofing issue is nicely dealt with there. There's no air getting in between those cracks. Obviously, if you are thinking of doing this, then make sure you don't start down the draft proofing path first and then think afterwards about insulation. Definitely do the insulation first and then deal with the draft proofing of it afterwards. And just one thing to say as well, the reason that we suspend it from the joists and don't just lay it all on the floor underneath, you know, the actual concrete floor underneath, is because we do still need a passage of air underneath that floor. And what you'll find is that you'll have an air brick on the outside of your house, and there's actually cold air just running through underneath your floor, and that's to stop any buildup of moisture in there, to stop the joist from rotting. So it's very important that we keep that gap at the end of it, so that air can still pass through. So if you do want to learn more about the housewarming party, you can go to the St. Nick's blog, and there's a write-up of it on there. And we are looking to do more of these in future, once we, if and when we get out of COVID restrictions. So that's something to look forward to. So the only other thing to say as well is that make sure that your carpets are well sealed around the edges of the room, because again, that can be a way for drafts to get into the room. And if you are doing the underfloor insulation, you can use airtight membranes underneath the carpet as well. So that's just an extra layer of protection then. Okay, so this is just kind of a big summary page of the various measures that we've just talked about. Obviously, don't need to sort of memorize it all now. We'll send out the slides at the end for you to have a look at. But yeah, that should just be a useful little reference for you. And you know, why don't you drop some hints to your loved ones about Christmas presents? Maybe you could get some, you know, get a chimney sheep, or yeah, or some stopgap or something for Christmas. You know, what could be better than the gift of a warmer house? Sorry, that was very cheesy. Okay, so would we say this is good or poor practice? Well, I'm going to tell you that it is in fact poor practice, and you've probably worked that out. So the key issue that we've got with both of these is that we've got a gap, basically. So they've made it gap here so for the catch to go in. So that kind of renders a lot of this draft proofing useless, because great, you've sealed up all around those edges, but you've left a bit here, so there's still a way for the air to get through. Similarly here, we've not joined the two bits of draft proofing, so we've still got a gap. So you need to do a complete job. You need to be, you know, you need to be very diligent about it, and not cut corners, literally. Otherwise, you're not going to get the best results. So these are some examples of good practice, and as you can see here, it's actually been cut specifically so that the two pieces interlock. So we've avoided any gaps there. It's all nicely interlocked together, so that's the proper way to do it. And again, we've got a seal going down here on the door, and at the point where it goes past the door handle, there's not much space. But rather than just cutting here and having a gap, we've just trimmed the seal slightly, so it's a thinner seal in that part, but we've got that continuous line going all the way down, so we haven't compromised the draft proofing qualities of it. If you do this, obviously you need to make sure it's all properly fitted, and you make sure that the door still closes properly afterwards, otherwise you're kind of invalidating the point of it. The door should close nicely. It should press against the rubber seal and squash it down slightly, and then you know you've got a good seal. And then Ivana mentioned this before, but it's worth just repeating, just to really drive it home. There are some things that we shouldn't draft proof, and so in rooms where we've got gas or wood burning appliances, we need ventilation in those rooms. It should go without saying, really, but don't seal up extractor fans, because their job is to move air out of the room. Then we've got air bricks and underfloor grills and things. Again, really don't seal these up. We talked before about the underfloor insulation and making sure that there's still a gap. And it's very important, because if you seal that up, then the moisture is going to build up underneath the floor and your joists are going to rot, and that's not going to be good. Similarly, we've got wall vents, trickle vents in the windows. Yeah, and just if you do have a carbon monoxide detector, is worth checking that it definitely works. If you are sort of restricting airflow, then it's just give you that extra peace of mind, because if there were any small sources of carbon monoxide before, it might just enable them to build up a bit more. So just, yeah, make sure that you take the proper precautions. So yes, next steps, find out where your drafts are. So go around your house, use the principles that we've shown you tonight to go and investigate your own house. As I said before, St. Nick's can lend out thermal leak detectors. At York Community Energy, we've got a thermal imaging camera as well, so you can talk to us about borrowing that. But there's a bit of a waiting list for it at the moment, just so you know. Remember about the areas not draft proof. You should keep that paramount in your mind at all times. Make a plan, and again, maybe you want to get some of these items for Christmas. So you know, drop some subtle hints to your loved ones. If you're not sure about something, don't be afraid to ask for advice. There are professionals out there who can help with this, and you can drop questions on our website and send emails, questions and things. Yeah, and then actually carry out your plan and compare the before and after, see how it goes, and let us know what worked and what didn't work. We'd love to hear how you got on. Yeah, and so are there any questions?
We had a question earlier in the chat, which was quite specific problem. So I don't know how much we'd be able to address it, but we can air it out anyway and see what if anyone's got any thoughts. So it was from Karen saying, I recently bought a 1960s house where the tile cladding was beginning to fall off. A builder replaced the tiles with a new membrane, battens and weatherboarding. I've got quite a lot of drafts coming through the window, through the bedroom windowsill, as I've not decorated that room yet. And I think it's coming from the gap between the weatherboarding and the wall on the outside, as this is not sealed up at all. There's quite a big gap when I stand outside and look up between the weatherproof membrane next to the wall and the weatherboarding. Can I seal it, or does the air need to flow through this part of the house? Possibly quite a long question, and maybe not a specific case that we can address, but I don't know if anyone has any thoughts.
So I think one thing we did not discuss is kind of how we would jump in answering questions. I think David there has a very good point that should have definitely been dealt with when that weatherboarding was placed in. So I think usually with some sort of flushing. I think the question would be, how long ago was this? It sounds like the builder should go back really and fix that, because that should not be. You shouldn't be getting air going through sort of under your windowsill. So that I think is definitely a safe one, I would say, to seal up. So I think a question is, can you get the builder back to finish off the job properly? And if not, then it might be that you will need to do that yourself. Do people agree?
Well, we'd need to actually, or whoever was advising would need to take a closer look. My guess is that there would need to be some air movement behind the cladding to dry out any water that might get behind there. And if that's the case, then just kind of sealing up the gap at the top of the cladding or weatherboarding won't actually seal the draft, because the air's already behind the weatherboarding and can go anywhere it wants, really. Get the builder back and then get the boys round.
That's not official advice.
You're all right, Ivana. Just me and Tom and John. There were some suggestions about the drafts coming off windows, as well as just having an extra curtain, thermal curtain there. You can have thermal liners that you can hang behind the existing curtains. And if you've got sash windows, then you could probably put those, do they call them sleeping dogs or something, those soft long cushions, put them on top of the lower window pane to stop the drafts coming up between the two of them. And I also noticed some thermal blinds that were two layers that you could put in place. So there's many ways of actually stopping those drafts, or at least slowing them down coming off the cold windows there. However, it's not actually fixing the draft at the source. The source is the fact that you've got some ill-fitting or not very thermally secure windows. Put them on your Christmas present list. New set of windows, please.
Yeah, I mentioned in the chat about the sort of slightly hack job solution that we came up with for our Sash windows, where we basically just stuffed some fabric into the gap where the brush strips should have been, which hadn't been installed properly when the windows were installed, which has worked very well actually. And we just take them out again in the summer. So yeah, there are varying levels of sort of professional approaches that could be taken with some of these things, I suppose. We have some other questions. So we've got another question saying, is there any additional advice around wall vents? I have 3 large ones at the tops of some of my walls. I was hoping to block them up and ensure that rooms had trickle vents instead. There are no combustion appliances in any of the rooms.
So I've seen this before on some houses, and I think sometimes it can be to ventilate the actual cavity of the cavity wall. It's probably worth checking with a builder if that's the case before just blocking them up. But different vents will be for different purposes, so it's definitely worth checking that first, but they should be able to clear that up for you.
We have another question saying, how much draft proofing should you do in the roof space? I have big gaps between roof and walls. Anyone like to come in on that one?
Well, if it's meant to be a ventilated attic, then you do need that gap. So there needs to be a good flow of air underneath the tiles to carry away any damp that could be accumulating there. Again, from all that warm air that's rising up through your house would condense on the underside of the roof itself. So you need a flow of air to clear that. If you do have a vented attic, and most houses do have a vented attic, then the cheapest way to insulate the house is put the insulation on top of the ceiling of the room below. So you're actually insulating the floor of the attic. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Hopefully the person asking the question as well.
And I'd kind of underline what was said in the video is that you really need to understand your house. So if you do plan to do something like take the tiles off and put insulation under your tiles and make the attic a warm space as opposed to a cold space, then you do really need to understand the physics of the house to know what that's going to do when it comes to condensation and vapor. Similarly, when you're doing things to the walls, I've got a solid wall house, and that means that the water vapor in the house can actually move through the wall and go to the outside world. Whereas a much more modern house, the water vapor is actually kept inside the house and dealt with inside the house. The walls aren't used as a way of getting rid of it. So if you've got a house like mine that has permeable walls, then you don't stick waterproof paint on the outside or vinyl wallpaper on the inside, because it stops the building doing that. And I didn't know that for a good 50 years of my life. It's not something they teach you at school. You really do need to understand the physics of your house when we're starting to do more than just draft proof.
Yes, I think we're getting into whole house assessment territory at that point, right? Okay, another question. This one's from Paul. Would thermal imaging camera be more effective on a cold day when the heating is on? I think the answer to that is yes. Are the green grants, so this is the Green Homes Grant, are they only available if a contractor does them rather than DIY? So, I mean, the short answer to that one is yes. The longer answer is that you need accredited installers to do the work as part of the Green Homes Grant, and those can be found through the sort of application process, which uses a website called Simple Energy Advice. And more so, on top of that, if it's draft proofing you're thinking about, then that's classified as a secondary measure. This is something I put in the chat earlier, but I'll just repeat it. Draft proofing is classed as a secondary measure under the Green Homes grants, which means that you also need to be doing a primary measure in order to be eligible for funding through that. The primary measures are things like insulation and low carbon heating, such as heat pumps. And you're limited on the amount you can spend on secondary measures to the amount that you've spent on primary measures in terms of the funding that you can get. So it's a sort of same amount on each is the upper limit.
Could
I
I
explain that very well, but yes, and the installers have to be accredited.
Can I take us back to the thermal imaging, and Tom could perhaps correct me?
That's what I was going to talk about. Go on.
Okay, I'll defer to you, Tom. Off you go.
Well, no, go on. You feel free to start.
I was going to say that ideally there should be a decent temperature difference between the inside and the outside of the house. And we're talking about something like 15 degrees centigrade, Tom?
Yeah, 10 to 15 would be ideal. Yeah.
Okay, and that needs to be maintained for several hours in order for the kind of heat and cold that's flowing through the walls and wherever else to kind of reach a steady state. So it's not something to be considered lightly. And we prefer to do things sort of over winter, January and February time.
Yeah, and ideally in the morning as well, if you can, so that the best conditions are a cold morning where you've had the heating on for around 24 hours beforehand. And the thing about the morning is that it means that the sun hasn't been heating up your wall so you haven't been getting any solar gain heating up the wall. So it just keeps that temperature differential between the outside and the inside. So I think that would be the ideal. If you want to go the extra level, you can do the blower door test, which Ivana mentioned before, where you actually get a big fan on your door, or in your door frame, and that reduces the pressure in your house, and that makes for even higher quality thermal images, because you can then see the cold air seeping through the cracks in the walls, and you really can see it on a thermal image. But again, it's all on a spectrum really of quality. So the more of these things that you can do, the more of these conditions that you can replicate, the better quality the images will be, and the more obvious it'll be, the easier it'll be to see where the drafts are. You can still do it even if you haven't had the heating on for ages, even if it's not freezing cold outside, but it will just be harder to spot the differences in temperature in the images. So it's not impossible, but it's just not advisable.
We have a question on that. Sorry, go on, Peter.
I was going to jump in there for the same reason that Tom's mentioned a blower door test, and Ivana mentioned it too. I don't know of anyone personally that does blower door tests here in York, but I do know that there's houses that have had them. Do we know how to get hold of a blower door or a blower door tester, apart from going on the web and hoping for the best?
I've just been frantically Googling. So we know someone in Cumbria, don't we? And we were hoping to invite Diana over for an event in York. But yeah, we need to find a supplier that's more local. So we haven't got the answer ready yet, but it's something that we will get into our onto our portfolio.
Yeah, there is a company that I've heard of that's based in York. I can't remember what the name is now. But they do. I don't know if they do them for sort of individual residents, but there's all kind of tests that you would get done if you were building a new house from scratch, and that's one of them. But yeah, I can't remember the name offhand, unfortunately. But I've definitely seen someone in York who does it. Whether you can just kind of ring them up and say, hello, can I come and get my house pressure tested? I don't know. They might just do them in batches for building companies. I'm not sure.
Well, they must do it for passive house certification. So they'll do it to individual buildings too. And maybe Phil Bixby can point us in the right direction. Constructive individuals must be doing it for individual houses.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, I guess if we can get contact detail, we can sort of try and find out and email you after the event, if that's all right, Marcus. Actually, we will have your email address if you registered. So yeah, we'll take that as a task to try and find someone local who does that. But it is not cheap. It is worth doing as part of a major sort of retrofit, because it will be a paid for service.
Great. We've also got we've got a couple of questions coming in. All right, so they're not questions, just some comments being provided here. Jamie's saying, for old houses where the gaps may have different sizes in different places, then Vaseline and silicone sealant can be a better draft proofing solution than all its material you can buy. So there we are. And some domestic energy advisors do air tightness testing as part of SAP calculations. So SAP is standard assessment procedure, I think. So that's a sort of method of doing building modeling to work out the energy rating.
Is it worth?
There's not anything else on the public messages.
I think I saw a question earlier about, can we just explain what a window reveal is in case anybody doesn't know? So you got sorry, Ivana.
It's okay. I posted a link to a
did you?
website that explains it. It's
Oh, okay.
But it's fine.
Cool. Yeah. So it's just like, so you got your window in your wall, got a hole in the wall, and it's a recessed bit of wall. So it's just that bit between the window and the main bit of your wall. Probably go and look at the link. It's probably explain it better.
I think if we don't have any more questions, it might be worth just throwing the floor open, because we do have a little bit of time left, and if people are happy to maybe share, those who have done draft proofing before, if you want to share any further tips that you've learned along the way, or if Jamie wants to explain a bit more about his Vaseline methods.
He's on mute.
Yes, Jamie, if you're still there, I want to know what you're doing with this Vaseline.
You're on mute, Jamie.
Oh yes, mute. Oh yeah, cardinal sin. I'm about to tell you, Peter. Right, so if you have an old house like mine, so I live in an 1880s terrace, and you might be thinking, well, great, I can go to B&Q or wherever and buy these strips of draft proofing material, which come in whatever, 2 mil, 3 mil, 5 mil. And then you look, if you take your front door, for example, and you look along the bottom of it, or indeed any edge of it, and it's a 2 mil gap in one place, and then it goes to 3 mil, and it goes to 5 mil, and then it goes back to 2 mil again. So obviously you could get the commercial stuff and lay it in different strips, but the risk is that your door won't shut properly, and there'll still be drafts coming in different places. So the solution is just to get an ordinary tube of silicone sealant, and you squirt a sausage of that along one surface, preferably the door itself. And actually probably the other way around. It's probably better to put it on the sill, thinking about it. And then you go to a chemist and you buy a load of Vaseline, and you put the Vaseline along the other surface, and then you shut the door and wait 5 minutes. And the reason you put the Vaseline on is because if you didn't, when you shut the door, you wouldn't be able to open it again, because the silicone sealant would have sealed your door to the door frame. But when you open it again after 5 minutes, what will happen is that the silicone sealant has been squashed to exactly fit the different gaps along the different places of your door. But it's not stuck fast because you use the Vaseline, and you just get a damp cloth and wipe the Vaseline off, and there you go, sorted.
Okay, that's worth a pint. A tip like that.
And it's dead cheap.
When COVID's over, I'll stand you a pint for that.
Jolly good.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, then all that's left for us to say is thank you very much for coming. And you can see there, if you're not already a member of York Community Energy, we'd love to have you on board. So you can sign up there. It's currently £2 for a lifetime membership, or if you pay more, you can get a T-shirt. And that's probably going to be going up soon when we become a community benefit society. So get in early while it's still cheap. Or you can just make a donation to us if you don't want to become a member. And obviously, feel free to follow us on all the socials.